All right, how does everybody feel? How was lunch? Good? Did everybody make at least one new friend? Yes? Okay. That's one of the really most important things about these events is the opportunity to network with like-minded individuals from different states, from different backgrounds, with different perspectives. If you spend any time in Washington, D.C., if you are going to work anywhere, it's certainly from a policy perspective, if you're going to run for office, it's these relationships that are critically important. And that leads into opportunities for partnership and coalition when they are authentic, when they're with your peers, equals, and it is really my privilege to introduce our next panel of distinguished speakers. And so quickly I will introduce Celina Stewart, the Chief Executive Officer of the League of Women Voters. If you will join me up here, Celina. Maya Berry, the Executive Director of the Arab American Institute. Bryan Fair, the Interim President and CEO of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And did we lose Héctor? Where's Héctor? Héctor Sánchez Barba. He just stepped out, all right. And can we find Héctor? Okay, Héctor will join us here in a minute. And joining us shortly is going to be Héctor Sánchez Barba, the President and CEO of Familia, Vota. Okay, he's running. Is he running? Okay, we're gonna give him a minute here. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. Do we have enough microphones over there? Okay, great. ¿Ah? ¿Estamos esperando? Thank you, Héctor. No, está bien. We're all good. Gracias. Okay, so the topic today for our conversation is coalition is strategy. And this is really meant to be an open conversation. And so I really want you all to just jump in wherever you see fit. And let's just start off with, how do you define coalition? And I'll start with you, Héctor.
First of all, thank you for the invitation. When we reflect on the moment of this nation, I think LULAC represents that historical fight of where we are. Remember how LULAC started? You guys talk about it at the beginning of this conference. Defining literally citizenship for Mexican Americans, the historical exclusion of Mexican Americans at the time, that still continues today, but it has a historical reason to exclude us from the political power in the nation through a lot of legal systems, racism, structural ways of taking power away from us in the communities, and that goes for most of the communities that we're representing today. And I think this question goes at the center of the most important fights that we're facing in the nation, which is working together in coalition. For me, one of the most beautiful and powerful moments in my career was the opportunity to participate in the 47th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March. I think it was around 2012. In that moment in particular was when all the movement that we see today was building into a very powerful entity. In that moment labor was under attack, women's rights were under attack, the Muslim community was under attack, Latinos were under attack with HB 56 in Alabama at the time, the most anti-immigrant legislation. And we all came together under one of the most powerful and inspiring mobilizations, which is the African American community on Selma to Montgomery, literally dying for the right to vote. And that is the spirit we need to keep bringing together, because we all have our own fights, our own attacks. But at the center of all of this is the collective political power that is being taken away and it's drastically affecting our families. And that is why this conversation is so important, so we can be more strategic and collectively fight against the extremism that we're seeing right now.
Thank you, Hector. Thank you. Bryan, Maya, Celina, anything to add to that and your thoughts on coalition?
I do. So I think of coalition as the ability to pull in a single direction despite divergent viewpoints, perspectives, and beliefs. Because anyone who's done coalition knows that it is messy, right? It can get messy. But I think the ability to pull in one direction is so important. And I think just if I were to put it in a word or a phrase, it is if you come against one of us, you're going to get all of us. And I think that that's really important.
Maya?
I completely agree. I think coalition is what you're looking at. Things get stated all the time, and you sort of wonder, what does that word really mean? I think coalition is about shared liberation. It's actually understanding that my wellness is tied to your wellness, and we only get there if we work on these together. And I would add only one small piece, because we have to name the challenges, right? A coalition is not a suicide pact. And what I mean by that is, when there are those disagreements, and it's difficult, and sometimes it's a political price that I might pay for having to stand up for him at one particular point, and you might have to, at some point, pay a political price for standing up for me. We still have to do the right thing that gets us to the shared liberation point. And I think that's what an effective coalition is. Otherwise, we're all sitting in a room having a lot of meetings and pondering about our state.
So I just want to say thank you to all the young folks who've come out today, because you really are the future of any coalition that we have in this country. And what I hope you'll see is the diversity of this coalition. I'm new to this coalition. By profession, I'm a law professor and have not been in the general civil rights space with other coalition partners. But when I took on this role, one of the first people to call me was Juan Proaño, and to welcome me in this new role at SPLC. He then introduced me to Roman, and then he introduced me to other partners through the Leadership Conference, through the Democracy Defenders, and we began thinking about how we could work together. Now again, I had never met Juan, he had never met me, but he knew the organization, and Juan builds relationships like few people that I know. And he uses those relationships to advance power for the community, not for himself. Coalitions really are, people can abuse power. We see that every day in the White House. Coalitions, for me, are about recognizing the humanity and dignity of everyone, the lived experiences of other people, and recognizing the common humanity and often common experiences of exclusion, especially in this country, where racialized populations have been categorically excluded under the law, where gendered populations have been excluded under the law, where different people, because of sexual orientation, because of religion, because of economic status, and otherwise, recognizing that there are similar experiences that by which we can build the kind of power that Hector has referred to. So I'm honored to be here thinking about coalition as a strategy with you, because again, the future is really in your hands, and I just want to recognize that.
Thank you, Bryan. And so we try to make these conversations real, you know, because there are real issues that are impacting our communities. And we are living in what has become a very, very divisive country, an attack on our democracy, this authoritarian movement, if you will, by this current administration, all at the cost of Black and brown communities. And so we've talked a lot about unity, about some of the strategic work, but from a coalition perspective, there's unequal power in coalitions and unequal resources as well. How do you go about, sharing leadership and also credit and partnership so the work is real and it's authentic? And I'm going to ask Celina to maybe give her thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, in thinking about the league has 52 state leagues, so all the states plus DC and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we have over 750 local leagues. So one of those power pieces is just capacity, and that we are everywhere, or in every congressional district at least. And so thinking about that, but one of the things I remember doing as chief counsel is, I was building this litigation piece. The league was doing amicus briefs at the time. We weren't really engaging in litigation from the plaintiff or intervener, which is the more powerful positions in litigation. And one of the things I did was, we wanted to get our name out there, but when we were specifically filing cases that impacted communities that do not look like my members, who are primarily white, it was important to do things like make sure that organization was named first. So that when you think about the case caption, which is just the first two parties, LULAC v. Florida, et cetera, that visibility was there. And also, I think of the league often as like a wedge organization because my members are white, because they often are privileged. How do we leverage that privilege effectively towards the liberation that we're talking about, right? And so being very thoughtful about that, because not everybody does it, not everybody thinks about it like that, but thinking about how do we leverage our power effectively towards this common goal, but then also how do we leverage our resources? So you may hear partners say that, Maya and I were talking earlier about the voter guide for organizations that may not be in all 50 states yet. To make sure that, they have some cover in states where they're not in, but their populations and constituencies do live. And so when I think about that power, thinking about how we use our capacity, how we bring other people to the table, even when we're doing fundraising proposals, knowing that the grassroots organizations are the least funded. We are never resourced to the capacity that we need, never. We haven't been for a very long time. And so how do we share resources, not just in people, but if we get a grant, can we bring someone else to the table? Can we also make sure that the benefactors of that grant is not just the league? So that is how I think about extending that power a little bit.
Thank you, Celina. And, one of the things is, being selfless. We have to put our community ahead of what our individual interests may be or organizational interests may be. And a couple weeks ago, I was actually in Florida because we have a case together, LULAC and League of Women Voters, on HB 1205, and SPLC is representing League of Women Voters in that case. And so that's a really great example of three organizations working together to protect the voting interests of minority communities in Florida. And that really is kind of what I point to. At the end of the day, we got work to do. Doesn't really matter, who's going to pitch in or how much credit they're going to get. We have to basically stand up for our community. So thank you, Bryan and Celina. Want to add thoughts on that, Bryan?
Yeah, just let me add this. What I say to the SPLC team all the time is that when you're in coalition and partnership with folks, you're not competing against them. And so lifting up another organization, using the resources of your own organization to partner with and recognize the partnership as an equal partnership. Again, that's a positive thing. It doesn't undermine SPLC in any way when we can serve the broader coalition in this fight. So that's the kind of messaging I try to bring to my leadership at SPLC.
Yeah. And we've seen a big difference, Bryan. Thank you for your leadership on that. Maya, so when voting rights, immigration, religious freedom, abortion rights are all under pressure at once, how do we treat them as a connected fight instead of little separate ones?
Excellent question. I think we start by acknowledging that those who structured these attacks are not doing them as individual policy issues that are separate from one another, but rather that there is an organized campaign to change the legal structures, the political structures, the civil society of our country. Every single one of those issues may have an individual organization solely dedicated to advancing the policy and the protection of the rights associated with those issues. But the underlying attack is really about redefining what our country is. I mean, there really isn't, this is what America could be, but no, this is what America should be. And understanding the interconnected nature of those is absolutely critical to both advancing the policy and to responding adequately. I mean, you know, in a room like this and in a group like this, before Kavanaugh stops, we had, you know, driving while black and flying while Arab. Like, we understand this. We understand how long it took for the 14th Amendment to potentially get us to a place where we can talk about American democracy, and now we're actually talking about the inclusive democracy piece of this. These elements have decided that specific communities make for easier targets. So if you talk about women's rights, there was a time where we kind of accepted that we had secured a certain level after the vote and after control of bodily with Roe v. Wade, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and the level to which that's occurred on the state level, the way in which some of those things we've accepted as having made some sufficient progress, and now we can go offensively to improve our societies, have required now that we shift back and sort of take a defensive posture on all of these things. And I don't think, I mean, LGBTQ rights in particular, right? Significant advances where we got to gay marriage and everything. So what have we done? We've taken trans community and decided that's the easier target now. I have a community, I mean, when I hear Héctor talk about exclusion, my organization was created in 1985 specifically because Arab Americans could not participate in the civic engagement table of this country because of our advocacy on something as basic as human rights. And the issue was Palestinian human rights. So how many years later, 40 years later, what are we still doing, right? So I think the key is to understand it's awesome you develop subject matter expertise on a particular issue. It's really critical that you do that. It's amazing that there's an institution specifically to voting rights. There's, you know, all of those have to exist. The key is to understanding, though, the interconnected pieces of all of those, and that you have to continue to understand that they understand that. 225 plus executive orders since Trump came to office in 2025. They're not individual policy areas. They're all coming together to do harm to certain communities. So we have to understand our response has to acknowledge that.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. You know, we live in a very polarized society now, very divided by our politics, sometimes single issue. And at a national level, like, we're on the same page, you know, 99% of the time, sometimes 97% of the time. But and my position has always been, let's focus on the areas that we agree on and let's move forward effectively in those areas. But Héctor, you've been doing a tremendous amount of work for many, many years in the Black and Brown community. Familia, Vota has a partnership with the Major Drum Institute, and I think you're about to launch a new initiative. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, historically, I've been very fortunate that thanks to the African American community, I was trained to be the activist that I am today. I was trained in organizing by an African American sister. We traveled the country together. I was doing organizing on education for Latino and immigrant parents. She was doing the African American community. She had a couple of decades of experience, and she taught me that unless we fight and we put everything on the line for our communities, we're not gonna get and push and advance the policy priorities and issues of those spaces. And I will always remember that, and I'm extremely grateful. From that perspective, and I'm gonna give one example. One time I was invited to speak at the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, some of the most important people in the labor movement, and they invite me to talk about the Latino organizing and immigrant organizing and our policy priorities and data. And I did something interesting just to prove a point. I presented the African American data and having some of the top experts in the room, they realize that at the end, I make the point, but that the struggles and the data on challenges, on wage theft, on death and injuries at work, on exclusion, on wealth gap, etc., it was almost, in all the cases, the same data point. And if we have similar policy issues and priorities, we must fight together to get almost 40% of the seats at the table instead of what they have been historically doing, that people of color and minorities deserve only one seat, and then they ask us, you guys fight it out because you guys only have one seat, which is a way to divide our communities and exclude power from our communities. We've been working for 2 years with the King family, Martin and Andrea in the Institute, to try to create unity and messaging around civic participation in particular, and making sure that the narrative is a narrative that makes sense for both of our communities. We're going to release a policy agenda in 2 months just to show what are the policy issues for both communities, which are extremely similar, and then a coordinated effort among national and local organizations to make sure that we're getting ready to organize in the different communities in the nation, pushing for those policy issues. The center of all of this is to go back to the legacy of Dr. King, to the legacy of Selma, to the legacy of a lot of the elements. I mentioned the Mexican-American exclusion from the very beginning after the U.S.-Mexican-American War. We can talk about the Puerto Rican community. We can talk about a number of communities, your community, Maya, the Muslim community, and the exclusion. And sorry about my accent, the foreignization, making us aliens, making us not belonging, making us otherness, to remove us from political power. And that's the spirit of why we're putting this together, and we're going to expand it to other communities.
So, I've learned so much in this position, in this role, and I love history and I love reading, and I read absolutely everything. And I think we all know about Martin Luther King's letter from Selma, and that's we all learn about that. And one of the things I was kind of getting into one of those rabbit holes was that he also wrote a letter to Cesar Chavez. And those 2 leaders in that letter, because Cesar Chavez was going through a hunger strike on the West Coast, right? Martin Luther King was on the East Coast in Selma. And he sent them a letter that we will get together and we will work together. But they never had the chance to actually do that, because Cesar Chavez passed away by the time that they were going to plan this meeting. And so, I am saddened by the fact that we never had that opportunity to have the 2 most prominent civil rights leaders in this country, Latino and African American, meet. But their message continues to effectively ring true today. And, it's harder for Latinos because we're such a disparate community from a racial perspective. And we don't have any one leader. If you were to say who leads the Latino community, who speaks for us, we struggle to find an individual voice. Carlos Eduardo Espina's was here. He's got 20 million followers. I would say that, he's the voice for the Latino community today. And that's, a pretty powerful voice because he has an incredible platform. But we don't have, God bless his soul, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. We don't have, Al Sharpton, who's been an absolutely incredible leader. And we are looking and struggling to find those leaders. But I'm struck that there's a little bit of a disconnect from a national perspective and a local perspective. And Bryan, SPLC does so much work centralized in the South. What does Latino community have to learn from the work of SPLC? What do we have to learn from the legacy of the African American and Black institutions? Because our fight is different, but we're connected in so many ways from a socioeconomic perspective. How can we connect the national frame with what's happening at a local level?
Thank you, Juan. It is important, I think, to learn from each other. and to recognize, again, each other's experiences. So this past year, the SPLC hosted Dolores Huerta, who was in her early 90s now, who was with Cesar Chavez in the great organizing of farm workers. And we have at SPLC what we call our JEDI principles, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we try to incorporate those across our organization so that the work we're doing internally is reflected in our work externally. SPLC does lots of work across the South, but we've also always done national work with partners. In the South, again, we work on mass incarceration, we vote on work on poverty, our hate and extremism work, of course. All forms of hate and extremism is national work. And we do work in education. We're hosting a number of freedom schools this summer in partnership with the Children's Defense Fund. So we have a number of pillars of work in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Georgia, Louisiana, and Florida. But again, we try to partner with, at the legal, policy, education, research level with other organizations so that our reach is much broader than just the 5 states in the South or the South itself. I want to tell you about one program at SPLC because some of you may be involved with voter engagement or voter education. We have a program called Vote Your Voice, which is an investment grant program for grassroots organizations that are doing voter engagement and voter education work. This cycle, we intend to distribute about $35 million to grantees. And you can reach out to SPLC and learn about Vote Your Voice. Again, much of that will be distributed in the South, trying to reach rural voters, low propensity voters, voters who've recently sat out our elections. So if you're engaged in any of that work, I would encourage you to reach out to SPLC because we're trying to prioritize building capacity of grassroots voter engagement organizations that will last not just in one election cycle, but beyond. So again, I learn from coalition partners all the time. And what I resist is the idea that the Black civil rights movement is the model for all movements. I think each movement is a model for all of us that we can learn from. We can learn from the indigenous movement and the struggle of indigenous people in this country. We can learn from the experiences of Mexicans and other Latinx communities post the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and beyond. We can learn from the women's movements of this country, as well as the Black civil rights movement. We can learn from the experiences of Japanese and Chinese and other people in the Asian Pacific Island community. We can learn from each other, we can lift each other up, and that's the approach I take.
Can I add something on that? I think that learning piece that you're talking about, Bryan, is so important because what we saw at the start of this administration, it really is, and I have categorized or said, and I know this may be triggering for some people, but this is the second coming of slavery. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people look at what happened in this country more than 400 years ago and say, how could people be stolen from a particular place, taken somewhere else, and then forced into labor, right? We are seeing that right now. We are seeing people swept off the streets, and we really saw it last year, right? And it's still happening, like the increase of the police state, but we are seeing people being taken from the home that they know, put on a plane, train, or some other transportation, and often sent to a place that they have no connection with, or at least no memories of, right? And so when I think about that, you know, it is really sobering to know how, like, we are looking at how slavery happened in a very domestic context. And so I think when we're thinking about those lessons, and the same thing happened with the Japanese in California, right? With the internment camps, where they were literally taken from their homes. People raided their homes for their jewelry, for their artistic artifacts, and they were taken to a camp where they were forced to build railroads and all types of things. So I think that when we think about the lessons in history, we are living it right now. It is not that far away. And, you know, while the four of us, I can't speak for y'all, but I'm tired. I've been doing this for a long time. And we have to pass the torch, but we have to also equip the younger generation with the tools and what we used and how we did things to equip you. You all are gonna modernize it, right? You're gonna, because you all have social media. We didn't have that. We couldn't get online and reach 20 million people. We had to pick up a telephone. There were horses, you know, depending on depending on the time, right? But you all have all of these things at your fingertips. But I feel like each of us are activists. It's just about what is going to be the problem in our neighborhood or around us that's going to activate us. And this is a time when I think it's so critical for us all to find our part. Everything seems so big, everything that's happening. But if everyone just does their small part or a small part, we will save ourselves in this country, and hopefully we will take that lesson and fortify ourselves so it never happens again.
Celina always keeps it real, and so we appreciate that. And I want to touch on that context of slavery and maybe what modern slavery looks like. In the United States, we had the Bracero program for many, many years, right? Mexicans that came into the United States with legal status to work, to build up this country in the South, in the Southwest, up through California. And when the oligarchs were finished with us and said, let's send them back to Mexico, and they started the last mass deportation effort of over 1 million Mexicans back to Mexico, sweeping up with them U.S.-born citizens and U.S.-born citizens' children. So fast forward to where we are today, and I want to lay this out in as clear possible way as I can. Because unfortunately, there isn't necessarily one thread that we can point to. But let me give you a couple steps. The first was an attack on birthright citizenship, okay? Which we have litigated and we sued, and we will be at the Supreme Court on April 1st. So they want to take away birthright citizenship for any person that's an immigrant that doesn't have legal status in the United States. So that's number one.
Post-slavery solution, right?
Yes. Number two, they're pouring in $160 billion for a detention and deportation system to get as many people as they possibly can effectively out of the country, okay, over the next 4 years. They're rewriting the visa rules and regulations, and what they will eventually do is they will allow immigrants to come back into the United States on a special visa, a work visa, where people will take advantage of them and pay them sub wages for work that nobody else will do. They will give them no pathway to citizenship. They will give their children no birthright citizenship, and that is in effect a form of indentured servitude and slavery. And we haven't necessarily talked about it in that way, but that is when you begin to kind of sort of put together all the pieces, what they're moving towards. And we cannot be blind to that. Whether you're Mexican American, Peruvian, Bolivian, Colombian, from Nicaragua or Honduras, that's their game. And they're pretty darn close to getting there, and the only thing that we can do to stop that is be much more engaged in this election process, and 2026 will have significant impact on where we go from here. And we're going to touch a little bit about on the election side of it. But I wanted to go back to Maya and Celina, because one of the things that we struggle in the Latino community, and LULAC has been accused of such a thing, as being very patriarchal, right? A lot of Latino men, right? got a lot to say, but I was raised by a single mom, you know. And she worked, and still works today, to provide for me and for my family, and to give us the opportunities that we have to do this work. And I was in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, and I was on the Native Land Pod, and Georgia Ford was with me. This was the day before she was arrested. And one of the things that she said was, well, if y'all listen to black women, we wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be here. And so, you know, Maya, Celina, what can we do better? What are the issues that have concern to you, to women across this country, that we can be more understanding about, that we can be more supportive of, that we can be more intentional in our work?
Well, I would start by saying that your mama's got to be incredibly proud of you. And then I'm going to give the black woman the microphone first.
Okay. Well, it puts me in a weird position because I'm black, obviously. Right? But my membership is not all. So I mean, I don't think black women are a monolith, but I do think that it is important to lean into people who have already been through the experience. And sometimes, you know, some people learn different ways. Sometimes you have to experience it yourself. And sometimes it's enough to see someone else's struggle and say, I either don't want that for myself or I do, right? And so I think that definitely leaning into the experience of people who have been here. But I don't think people knew that what we were heading towards was slavery again. Mm-hmm. I honestly think that there were a lot of people in this country who believed in the campaign that the Trump administration had, that it was going to only attack certain people, which is problematic in itself. Mm-hmm. Because when we were sending our members out to talk to people, one of the things that I heard that really disturbed me was it wasn't supposed to be us. And I said, what the hell does that mean? That's a whole science project to figure out did you think your name was going to be on the list and that you would be saved in some way? But it just gets back to this idea that we are more separate than we are together. We are more similar than we are different. And I think that is so, so critical. So I will say at the League, one of the things that I am so focused on is we have a lot of older white women who I think want to do the right thing, and I know our members want to do the right thing, but how do we use them effectively? There's a level of privilege that white women have and they can use in particular ways that we haven't pushed our folks to use in that way. Whether that's using your bodies as a barrier, whether that is using your voice, because you may not be the first one shot. You know, and I hate to speak like that, but that's the reality. Because now we're in a place where people are losing their life in this administration. And so thinking about how, as a black woman, I show up in this space where I'm leading primarily white women and trying to do things in a way that show and teach them how to use their privilege in a way that is helpful and not harmful is really important. And so I think from the women's context, women are divided. We saw in the 2024 election that black women, brown women voted differently than white women. So how do we get to a place where this is not about protecting ourselves, but about creating the democracy that serves us all? And I think part of that is by moving white women in a direction where they are voting with more autonomy with the rest of the women. Mm-hmm. Black women, Arab women, Hispanic women. We've got to, because no one's going to trust. No one's going to trust anyone if you're the one outlier sticking it to us all. And so I will say that's not popular, but I will say that is how I look at this work, and I'm very conscious and thoughtful about how I do that, because you have to walk that line sometimes pretty carefully.
Yeah. Maya?
I would just add that, it's so incredibly important, and it's the lived reality of this individual that comes to the table with a set of expertise about things. So when I mentioned my organization being established, our co-founders literally published an academic paper at the time called The Politics of Exclusion. 1972, Richard Nixon decided that Arab American immigrants should be treated differently, including our students. What happened during the first Gulf War, when the FBI would show up in Arab American communities to address hate crimes, but at the same time ask you, do you know a terrorist? Do you know someone that might be doing something? How do you report a hate crime if law enforcement is approaching you that way? Post 9/11, the reality as it exists, you're too young, but you've read about it, I know you understand it. So my point in putting that context is, yes, listen to Black women, listen to Arab women, listen to people who have a lived experience that brings a context to what's happening right now so that we can defeat and win for our vision of this inclusive democracy. So I am, to your point about, it's not popular, there are some people who have discovered post-Trump 2.0 that your government can be weaponized against you. I am really sorry that you are having that experience, and I am with you to fight right there. But please know that there are communities who have been keenly aware of that problem for decades. And what they bring to the table is the context and capacity to better address the challenges we face now. So you asked the question initially about capacity and the differential powers, and all of that needs to be part of your analysis.
Yeah. And so one of the things I always talk about, just given my private sector experience, is that there are things that affect significant change. The internet basically leveled the playing field for small businesses, big businesses, because nobody saw online if you were small or a big shop. They just saw a website URL and you could compete. And we've seen very small companies compete against really big, giant oligarchs. And the same way, effectively, from a coalition perspective, right? It is a great community. We're members of the leadership conference, and Maya Wiley does a really great job to kind of sort of set the table to make sure that everyone has a voice and everybody's voice is heard. And so, for me, that's the gratitude that I get. That's the energy that I can feed off of with partners like each of you. But one of the things in regards that's been interesting for me and for us at LULAC from a leadership perspective was, I'll be very candid, my expectation coming into 2025, given all the raids and all the DHS, militarization tactics that they've been using, is that we were going to have a Latina woman that was a mother that was killed. That was 100% my expectation. I was waiting for that day to basically come. And hoping it would essentially be a watershed moment that could catalyze the country around this authoritarian movement that we're basically seeing. And lo and behold, Renee Good ended up being that person that was shot and killed. And she was a woman, and she was a mom all the same, but she wasn't Latina, right? And then all of a sudden, a couple weeks later, Alex Preddy gets shot in the street in Minneapolis. And so now you've got a nurse who's not Hispanic, who's now been shot and killed, for millions of people to literally see in video, almost in real time, effectively, what has happened. But what that has done is it's brought together the progressive community with the interest of the Hispanic, Latino immigrant community. And that is essentially what we've seen, is this kind of sort of catalyzation of mutual interest to get DHS and essentially ICE out of these communities. My concern is that, once the de-escalation stops at DHS and ICE, maybe the masks come off, because we're continuing to advocate for that maybe the progressives will be like, okay, we're okay with that. But at the same time, our federal government will continue with the detention and the deportations all the same. And so we have a lot of work to do, that we continue to build those relationships with the progressive movement, with progressive women, with progressive white women as well, so that we have the solidarity that we effectively need moving forward. But, Hector, comment on the state of the immigrant community, because a lot of them are still sheltering in fear. You know, they're taking the night shift. They're not going out anymore. They basically go from home to work and work to home. What's your perspective on the immigrant plight?
Thank you, Juan, for bringing attention to top priority in the nation. And we need to go to the root causes of the situation. As a nation, we are a hypocritical space that heavily depends on the labor of immigrant workers and don't respect that labor. 11 million undocumented workers in the most powerful nation of the world is not a mistake. It is public policy. And we need to ask the question, who benefits from the work of 11 million undocumented workers? Every single person of this nation. So I ask, what kind of system do we have? This nation has been able to create the perfect system of exploitation in the world. We want to take advantage of these workers, keep them in the shadows, violate their labor rights, their human rights, and their civil rights, and not give them the basic elements of inclusion in society is unacceptable. So I ask the MAGA movement, if you are really anti-immigrant, do something about it. Not killing people, not supporting ICE, but do something personal about it. Boycott. Stop buying fruits and vegetables that have been touched with immigrant hands. Stop buying houses that have been built with immigrant hands. Stop driving on roads that have been built with immigrant hands. Otherwise, you are just a white supremacist that is hypocritical while taking advantage of undocumented workers. And that's the approach that we need to take. We are in a different stage now with the ICE, an increase of one of the worst terrorizing forces in the history of humanity, with an increase of 400% in the budget, is extremely worrisome. We need to be united about stopping this terrorizing killing machine in the nation that is affecting all communities. And one point that most people are not talking about is the role that ICE is going to play in elections. They said it 3 weeks ago on the press conference. Steve Bannon and others already say we're going to use ICE to stop, I'm not going to say the word that they use, but undocumented people from voting. You know what is going to happen if these people are in our communities? And we are building a campaign to respond with early voting, vote by mail, mobilizing our communities, etc. That's what we need to do on the issue of immigration. One very quick comment about the issue of women in the movement, and thank you for bringing it up, Juan. I'm the first Latino in the board of Planned Parenthood, and I want to turn the question. What is the role of progressive men in the fight of women's rights? The most important enemy in the history of the nation against women have been conservative men. What is the role of progressive men, not as leaders, but as allies in the fight for reproductive rights, for fighting wage theft, for women's rights, etc.? We need to vote with women's rights issue at the center. We need to put our money around women's rights issues elements, and we need to define that agenda because we need to make sure we're moving in that direction.
Thank you. Powerful, powerful words. I could do this for like 2 more hours, 3 more hours, 4 more hours. I mean, I love the folks on this stage. We have another really great panel coming up with Ambassador Norm Eisen on some of the litigation work that will speak to our plans to build an election protection network because LULAC's going to be on the front lines litigating a lot of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight at the gala as well. But if we could, we'll start at the end, Celina, maybe some final thoughts and parting words for our young leaders here today. And what they can do when they go back into their communities to build the resistance that we need to change the direction that we're currently on.
Okay, so I'll say that what's happening in America has happened across the world, right? So we have examples and we have frameworks, right? And so what we've seen across the world is that it only requires 3.5% of the population for us to turn a corner on what we're doing. So it means that it doesn't even, that's 96% that don't have to, we don't need them. We just need 3.5. And so I would say to you, as you are going back to your communities, if you're not already joining or tapping into other organizational things, especially grassroots stuff, please do. The league has our Unite and Rise 8.5 campaign, where we are literally every 3 months giving our leagues a playbook of activities that you can do very hyper-local to move the needle. So non-cooperation, defections, which just means how do we break up this system? And so plug in, and please, 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 especially as young people, talk to your friends and your family about voting. Think about this as the last election that we may have in this country, for real, for real. And so it is so important for you all to be having conversations with your peers about how important it is to participate. This is not the time to think, to give up your power and abdicate your power when this may be the last time to exercise it.
Right on. So if you want to understand more about what's happening in our country right now in this moment, the incredible work that SPLC, Bryan's organization, has done on white supremacy and white nationalism has been decades in the making. And I think it honestly grounds the conversation in a very real and meaningful way, because the attack, as I hope you've gathered from all of us, is about an inclusive democracy. It is about redefining what America is, who is an American. Juan made the point about the trajectory. You left off denaturalization. I know why you left it off, because you were talking about it in the context of how you get to the slavery mind frame. But keep in mind, denaturalization has been a priority from Trump 1, and now it's resourced in a completely different way. And when you've redefined, I joke about these things only because it's like a way to, I guess, deal with it in a healthy way. When you talk about, I'm the terrorist before, but now the young people killed in Minnesota are also terrorists, right? We've redefined what a domestic terrorist is. If you're protesting, right? All of this is happening in a way that I think you have to ground the analysis in some of what you've heard today. But I'll stop by saying we're broken on the federal level in a very real and meaningful way. So one of the most important things that you can do is go home and look at what you're doing on the local level and organize on the local level. Your local municipalities, your state work is even more important now than it was before. So please, as you do that, hold us accountable the other way back too, because there is so much for us to learn from what is happening on the local level that is actually having a very positive material impact on people's lives.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom my colleagues have shared with you, and I'm grateful again to be here. I especially appreciate Héctor sort of acknowledging male privilege as a cornerstone of patriarchy, and that to dismantle that, men have to recognize the unearned privilege that we have in our society. I hope that you will find your voices for whatever causes drive you, that you will build the kinds of networks and coalitions that Juan has described, that you will learn about not just the Latinx community, but about the lived experiences of other people in this country who share a common experience of exclusion from a powerful government that refuses to recognize and embrace all of us. We're marking the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I've argued that we need a declaration against caste, that we have to dismantle all forms of caste in this country, whoever experiences it for whatever reason. And I hope you will join me in that fight.
First of all, thank you, Juan and LULAC. LULAC is such an amazing organization. Keep doing what you do and partnering with us and other spaces in the nation. The history of our nation has a very dark moments. But I will say it's mostly a history of hope, a history of movements, a history of pushing to become better. And we can analyze all the movements. We discussed the movement of the African American community. We discussed one of the most inspiring movements is the women's movement for the right to vote. We have, for me, one of the most inspirational moments have been the marches on immigration. The largest marches in the history of the nation was of immigrants saying enough is enough to the exploitation. Another inspiration is dreamers, undocumented and unafraid. How poetic and how beautiful is that, putting everything on the line for your nation and for a cause. And that's the history of our nation. And something that is at the center of every single one of those movements, they have been led mostly by young people. In LULAC, a space that has so many young people organizing in different spaces, you are in a space of hope and inspiration. So I just ask to keep organizing. I just ask to keep that spark of just hope. And I have to do my work. Let's connect with mi Familia Vota. We're in 10 states. Follow us and do all of that work. And I still believe in the element of hope and that we can get this back to the democracy that we deserve.
I am grateful, humbled for your partnership, for your solidarity, for your leadership. I have nothing to add because I want the last word to be of that of our partners. So thank you for joining us in community today. Thank you for the incredible work, and I look forward to continuing the partnership through this election cycle and the years to come. Thank you.